Welcome to What Drives You with your host, Mike Gourdet. Human solution consultant from Seattle, Washington. It is now time to sit back, buckle up for the show that drives the asking question of what drives you. And now your host, Mike Gourdet.
Good day or good evening, whatever that is. Welcome to episode 5 of What Drives You, the show about why we do the things we do. I'm Mike Gourdet, your host, a human solutions consultant here in Seattle, Washington. Today, we are going to talk with Leah Moore of EMP with Me. We will get to that next. Then we're going to talk about why you are a control freak. And then we're going to answer our question of the day. So stay tuned, stick around, and thanks for showing up. And welcome to today's show, What Drives You, the interview. Today we have Leah Moore of EMP with Me. Was that right?
You got it, Mike. That was right.
All right, perfect. Welcome to the show. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk with us today about what your passion is and what drives you. But first, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are in the country, or what you like to do.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me, Mike. I'm really excited to be here and to get to talk to you today. So as you said, my name is Leah Moore. I am the owner and founder of EMP with Me, LLC. I'm a codependency coach through this company. I am on a mission to end suffering through helping men and women get past behaviors of codependency, like people pleasing, imposter syndrome, feeling unworthy, feeling lonely, overachieving. These are the kinds of things that I really love to work with people past. These are things that I have been working past and will always work past because it's continuous work. I really just launched my company this year, and it has been a wild ride during COVID, but it has really been a huge blessing during the crazy season of COVID, which I bet you know.
Everything's wild in COVID.
It is. It's been a really big transition, but it's been a huge blessing. And I felt more fulfilled in the last year than I have in my entire life. I'm a devoted mother and fiance. I am an avid food lover and an adventure seeker. I love to be outdoors anytime that I can. Currently, I'm located in a rural town in northern Nevada. I'm originally from Northern California, so not too far away. And honestly, I really love the area that I'm in. It's beautiful. We have mountains, we get snow, we get rain. We kind of have all of the beauty here, and I really, really enjoy it.
Great. You have a lot of things going on there. What of those would you describe as you're most passionate about?
Definitely ending suffering and making the world a better place.
Okay, so that leads into the question then is what drives you? What is it about that makes that so important for you to do as a mission in life?
I hate seeing suffering. I absolutely hate seeing suffering in the world. I suffered in silence for years with codependency, and I didn't have any idea what I was suffering from. I didn't even really know that I was suffering from something. All I knew is that I felt a sense of unhappiness, unease, and unfulfillment. And really what drives me is my life today. I feel fulfilled and happy and peaceful and present in my life. And I want other people who are suffering in silence to feel these feelings in life. I want other people to feel like they can share the truest version of themselves and show up as themselves and be accepted and be loved and have unconditional self-love. So really that's my biggest driving point, I think, is my life before and my life now.
Okay. Can you give us an idea of when you say suffering from codependency, can you give us an idea of what that might feel like for somebody who may not know that they are actually existing in a codependent relationship?
Yes, definitely. So codependency started very early on for me in life, at a
Hmm.
very young age, because codependency is a family cycle that has been passed down from generation to generation to generation. Now, I didn't learn about codependency until I was 14, and my mother fell into an addiction with opiates.
Okay.
And during this process of her addiction, I would go with her to meetings. My small town at the time didn't have Al-Anon, which for those who don't know is really like the meetings for codependents
Right.
in relationships with addicts. And we didn't have that. So I just went to like NA meetings,
Hmm.
Narcotics Anonymous, and really started to learn a little bit about codependency. But everything that I was being taught had nothing to do with the symptoms. It had nothing to do with the symptoms, right?
Hmm.
Codependency, the old definition of codependency states that you have to be in a relationship with an addict to be codependent. And in the last few years, I found that to be so untrue. I found that codependency shows up for me in overachieving and
Okay.
having a warped sense of what hard work is.
Hmm.
Always working really hard for everybody else, but not really feeling like anybody was willing to work for me. Not being willing to ask for what I need or want, right? So if we're not willing to ask for what we need or want, how are people supposed to help fulfill the needs? So overachieving, not asking for what I want or need. Perfectionism was a big one. Just wanting everything to be perfect and having really high anxiety when things were not perfect, which they never are. So you can imagine how often I was struggling with anxiety. I also struggled a lot with people pleasing, which is something we hear a lot about. But people pleasing for me showed up in literally the inability to say no. It was so difficult for me to say no to anyone. I was constantly putting everyone's needs above my own and saying yes, even if it made me super uncomfortable to say yes.
Okay.
I also really struggled with boundaries, right? Not
Hmm.
having healthy boundaries in place for myself and for people that I was in relationships with, whether it be coworkers or friends or boyfriend or even my mother. My mother and I have struggled with codependency long after. My mom has been sober, thank God, for 7 years, which has been beautiful. But the
Well, that's good.
codependency has continued to show up a little bit in that relationship, more so than any other relationship in my life. But it's really constantly putting everyone else above yourself. No self-worth, no self-love, not even knowing what we want. I mean, that is really a lot of the symptoms that I came to realize were my codependency.
Okay. All right. And what would you say your biggest strength in helping others deal with that is?
I've walked the walk and I continue to walk the walk every day. I have worked through and am still working through a lot of these things that I have just listed for you as far as symptoms. This is constant work. People pleasing for a codependent never fully goes away, but
Hmm.
I have learned quite a few things that allow me to really say no when I want to say no. And
Right.
when it's appropriate to say no, it's allowed me to not feel like an imposter in my own skin, to show up vulnerably and authentically and be okay with being rejected. Not having that fear of judgment anymore and setting healthy boundaries for myself and other people. It's walking the walk and going through the experience of codependency and coming out the other end of it better and continuing to do that work so that I don't backslide, because it's always possible for us to backslide.
Yeah.
It has to be a constant work. It has to be a constant work, and I do that every day.
Okay. All right. That sounds like you have a pretty good handle on things. And you've been doing this since May, right?
I I launched my company officially in May. I actually truly believe I've been helping people with codependency for a lot longer than that, but I didn't realize what I was doing at the time because I was suffering from my own codependent behaviors.
Your own illusions, right?
Yes, definitely. But that's the thing. As a codependent, I get the most joy and fulfillment out of other people's happiness, other people's peace, joy, love. So I've always kind of tried to help other people. It's just now I'm doing it in a much more structured, healthy, boundary kind of way.
All right. Okay. Well, that sounds like you got a lot of energy surrounding that. So that's great. One of the things that we talk about here in my realm is of course what drives you. But one of the things I like to ask my guests when they are on is, do you have a question about human behavior? Do you ever watch somebody do something and go, I wonder why they just did that? Do you have any of those questions?
I do.
Okay.
I do. So I've been doing a lot of research. I am a major research analyst. So I've been doing a lot of research into vulnerability, and something that's closely related to vulnerability is shame. So my question for you is, why are we as a society afraid to talk about shame? Why don't we talk about shame openly?
That's a really good question. And I'm sure you, in your research, you found some answers, a lot of answers. One of the things that I talk about is we are human beings that need other human beings. And one of those pieces is that we, in order to become a group, or in order to be in a group, we have to do things that more or less tamp down on our individuality because of the differences, right? So I don't know that it's about why people don't talk about shame so much as it is about talking why we have the shame,
Yeah.
Because shame is an ongoing identifier for our being. It's not guilt, although guilt and shame are related. If I do something wrong, I feel a sense of guilt because I know I've done something wrong, but I get over it. Shame is saying that instead of I did, I became.
Yes, exactly.
And because one of our greatest fears as human beings is that fear of rejection, as soon as I take on that mantle of I am, I also take on the consequences of being that, which is if I am shame, or whatever it is I'm ashamed of, I then have to live up to that because we need congruence in our life, in our psyche. That means that I can't be judged by it, because that would mean I am risking rejection. So I'm constantly worried about that fear. So I think probably we don't like to talk about shame because it's not necessarily about shame, but it's because it brings up all these fear wrought illusions that we carry with us. Because I think we all have certain things that we're ashamed of doing that creates part of our identity. And as part of our social being, we don't want to let anybody else see that for fear of that judgment. Is that sort of what you found in your research?
Definitely. The fear of judgment comes up a lot when it comes to having any kind of awareness around shame. And I really love what you said about the difference between shame and guilt, because that's so important, and something that I found a lot in my research too, that there's a really big difference between shame and guilt. Guilt can be productive. Guilt can be productive in making us not do actions that we feel bad about again. But shame is not productive. Shame has zero production in thinking that we are a horrible person for doing something that we did, or I am, as you said.
Yeah, it's one of the primary drivers of things like addiction,
Yeah. Shame dictates so many of our decisions in life, that that I feel like we have to talk about it more. We have to raise more awareness around shame and why we feel shame, because putting it under the rug does nothing good for us other than make us make decisions that we probably wouldn't make if we didn't have that shame.
Yeah, it definitely does create some situations, and it's certainly going to be an undertaking in order to get those into more public arenas. You're correct in saying that we don't like to talk about shame as a culture, because a lot of times we don't even want to acknowledge that we have it. So good luck with that.
Have you heard of Brene Brown?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. She's on my
Leading the
book
movement.
list. Yeah, she is creating the vulnerability movement. So
Yeah, well, it creates a lot of awareness about shame. A lot of my research has come from Brene Brown because she has spent years and years researching shame. So if anybody wants to learn more about shame, I would highly suggest Brene Brown, because she has some very amazing backed scientific research around shame that is really impactful.
yes, absolutely. Her TED Talks are pretty great too.
Yeah, so are her books. I listen to Brene all the time. Her books are really amazing too.
All right. Okay. Well, Leah, that's about the time that we have for today's interview. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about your passion and what you think drives that. Good luck. That's a big undertaking.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the wish of good luck. I feel very confident that I will make very big moves in what I am trying to do right now.
All right. Well, we'll certainly be watching.
Thank you so much, Mike.
All right. You have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And thanks again for hanging with us. Stick around. We will be back with our next segment. You have a nice day as well. And welcome back. Thanks again to Leah for joining us today for our interview. Today, we're going to talk about, well, let me ask this question. Are you a control freak? You may get upset about this, but yes, you are. Hold on. Don't get too upset. Don't turn that dial. Let me explain. Human beings, again, this is all part of the same web that I've been creating about human behavior over the last few episodes. And in a few places, I've mentioned the fear of the unknown. The fear of the unknown creates a vast portion of our daily lives, and we don't even realize it anymore because we are so used to everything. And what I mean by that is that if you've ever noticed, we have a label for everything. And part of that label is based on a control factor. If something is unknown to me and I stick a name to it, then that name becomes known to me. Therefore, that thing that I have named that was previously unknown has suddenly lost some of its power to frighten me. So in essence, we are all control freaks. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more. So if you think about, from an evolutionary idea, or even just an ancient idea, if that's not your bent, where we are not able to take advantage of all the modern conveniences that we have today. It's hard to find fresh water. We have to hunt or gather or farm our food, and if something wipes out our crops, we're in trouble. We don't have electricity. We don't have things that's powering our very lives. And so we don't know what's going to happen, and that unknown creates a lot of stress in our lives. So when we start to label things and when we start to understand things and know that we can count on certain things, that becomes a great known. So you can look at some of the ancient religions that worship the sun as being one of these things that we're trying to attempt to control or put some amount of control onto it so that we can feel more comfortable with it. If I have somebody who is a sun priest, and he is telling me that if I worship the sun, otherwise it may not show up tomorrow. And in point of fact, if I don't worship, it's going to go away tonight and there's going to be all this scary darkness around me. I might be more willing to listen to him because there's an air of certainty about that. Do you catch what I'm throwing? We do this all the time. In fact, if you look at our history and our development over history, almost everything that we do is an attempt to control something, whether it's the geography around us, whether it's the groups that surround us, whether it's even the weather. With we're trying to control the weather, we're trying to control tides, we try to control rivers, and some of that stuff we have accomplished, some of that stuff we still haven't accomplished, but we are attempting to control that. In our modern medical age, we are trying to control aging, we are trying to control disease, we are trying to control every external thing out there. And this brings up an interesting prospect that I've referenced to in the past. We spend an awful lot of time trying to control our external worlds, and we don't seem to spend a lot of time trying to control our internal worlds. Now, this, I believe, is a function of technologically driven societies. There's a correlation between technology and mental health that is across the board. The more technologically advanced a society becomes, the more mental health problems exist. The less technologically advanced this culture is, the more social bonds they create and the less mental health activities that they have. Now, before we get into any debate about all the superstitions and things that arise, this is a basic idea. Everything that I talk about is complicated by different variables, but we're looking at things from a gross lens. So, how do we control things from our perspective? Well, we control things in our environment every day. We have our spaces that we control how that space looks, how we interact with that space. It's just a natural function of being a human being. And then, depending on the amount of anxiety or fear that we may be trying to deal with, we see expansions or less expansions of those types of activities. So we see people that have some serious anxiety, they're trying to control their environment in very specific ways. And when this comes out, we see it in things like OCD or other anxiety-driven diagnoses like borderline personality disorder, things like that. And I'm talking about an extreme. I'm talking about things that don't rest on the normal continuum of what we call normal. And again, I think we're all well acquainted with that normal air quote. You know, what is normal? Normal is subjective. In fact, everything that we do is subjective. Everything that we label is subjective. Everything that we try to control is subjective. It's all subjective. So even me sitting here telling you about this, I'm coming from a place of subjectivity because there's no such thing as a true objectivity. We can close that gap by using rational thoughts or by using unemotional language. But the fact of the matter is that we can never get completely and fully away from subjective environmental analyses because every single one of us has emotional responses to things. So how do you feel about that? How do you feel about being a control freak? I bet you didn't wake up this morning thinking, I am. Wow. That's not to say that it's a bad thing. I'm just saying this is how we do this. Now, I mentioned earlier that we tend to try and control our external environment rather than our internal environment. And why do we do that? Well, we do that because it's easier for me to clean up a desk or vacuum a floor to give me a sense of peace and calm about my environment than it is for me to deal with whatever emotional state I have for the reasons that I'm doing things. So we tend to say that somebody who cleans up or is a neat person, they have been brought up correctly or that, but there is an unease with disorganized environments that create some anxiety that compels people to want to control that area. We do that in relationships too. We try to control the other person in our relationship. We try to get them to see the world as we do rather than let them have the worldview that they have, especially if it threatens our belief systems. So in relationships, we can fall quickly into a trap of saying, you need to change, you need to change, you need to change, when really a lot of that behavior is driven by our own fears and needs. We do it in relationships. We do it in our housing. We do it in business. We do it everywhere we do it. It tags along with what I discussed last week about people needing people and how we externalize our belief systems. So what does this mean for you? Well, it doesn't have to mean anything. None of the stuff that I talk about has to mean anything at all, because you're a person and you get to choose how you believe, what you believe, whatever you'd like to do. But how can you use this to your advantage? Well, the first thing that I can recommend is that you start looking inward. Again, looking inward is a lot more difficult than looking outward at our environment and the people in our environment. Looking inward is often a painful situation. It's because there is so much in our unconscious that drives the choices that we make, that is created by fear and pain. Right? So that goes back to the very first episode where I talked about the binary brain, right? Pleasure, pain. We tend to move away from pain. We tend to move towards pleasure. And that system is the very system that creates the belief systems and the perceptions that we use when we're going through our daily lives. So it exists to create those lenses. That's why therapy is generally a difficult subject, because in therapy you really have to attack some very painful things, and the unconscious doesn't want to release any of that stuff because why? Because if we do, there's that unknown quality. There's suddenly an unknown that we have to face, and that's a huge, huge fear. So when we're doing these sorts of introspective things, we're basically balancing our fears with that genetic fear of the unknown versus the fear or pain of the remembered event or even the non-remembered event. One of the wonderful things about our brain is that if we suffer a traumatic event, it will sort of delete things from our active memory so that you don't relive those, but it's still there in our unconscious. And we form adaptive behaviors around it. So when we talk about, let's say, youth in poverty-stricken areas that join gangs, okay, we look at the behavior and we react to the behavior. You know, if they're out there stealing things or whatever they're doing, enacting violence against the community, we look at the behavior and we try to extinguish the behavior. And we do that through a behavior control system called the punishment system, the legal system. And it's very difficult for us to seek understanding for why that person is doing what they're doing. Even when we consciously can do that, is difficult for us to accept, because that person continues to do. We sort of have this idea that we can just care about somebody and they're going to do what we want them to, and that's not the case. Those adaptive behaviors that person is showing is how that person has survived. And when it doesn't mesh in with what I think it should, or it isn't affected by what I'm doing to help that person understand, it's easier for me to shut down and go my own way. So we see this in the foster system, where you have these youth moving from foster care to foster care to foster situation, and they become numbed to any sort of caretaking. In fact, they oftentimes actively rebel against everything, because they really are checking to make sure you're going to stick around, that you're going to have the staying power to help them get through that survival thing. And that's how this stuff meshes really, really powerfully in a lot of the things that we see out there in our society that gets our dander up. So what I'm trying to get you to is not necessarily that you try to go out and fix the world of its problems. It's more about trying to understand where those problems come from in order to deal with that, to take some time away from reactivity and do some introspection. When somebody does something that we don't like, our whole system, our whole unconscious system is set up to disparage that, to get angry, to whatever. It's very difficult for us to then build some sort of relationship with whatever we're seeing. It keeps us safe in a nice little bubble that has greater consequences outside of that bubble. This is not about perfection. This is not about becoming an awesome person. It's simply about this is kind of what's going on. If you want to change that, this is kind of what you got to do. So take that how you like. Hopefully you're not still offended for me calling you a control freak, even though you are. And if you have any questions, please let me know at mike@whatdrivesyou.net. Thank you for listening. And we're going to move on to the next segment as soon as we come back. Thank you very much. And we're back. Today's question of the day comes from Nancy, and it is, how do people change? More or less. How do we get people to change? Well, there's a couple of schools of thought about that. One of them is that unless the person wants to change, you can't change them. Or if you take sort of the idea of the penal system, we can make you change. And true, we can make you adapt to the situation. What is change? Now, in my opinion, change is something that we have to want first. But in most respects, we have to go deep down into that formula, the binary system that we start with, until whatever it is we're doing creates so much pain in us that the only way to fix it is to change. That's generally how things work. I'm not saying exclusively, I'm saying generally. Working in the addiction field for 8 years, that's one of the things that I learned, that typically speaking, until a person with an addiction gets to where the pain of the consequences that surround the behavior of getting high or getting drunk is so bad that it takes away all the pleasure of any of that. That's when they start to change. That's what is considered rock bottom. And that holds true for anything else. We don't change simply because of change. We change because there is some pain that we're experiencing because of what we're doing. People who quit smoking or want to quit smoking, they are basically balancing out or comparing with the pain of why they want to quit smoking versus the addictive qualities that they've grown to expect. And that's when it becomes difficult, because as initially it's all about the pleasure of the thing that we're doing, but the more we do it, the more our body adapts to it, and taking away from that can create even more pain. So when you quit smoking, you are not only getting rid of the pleasure you get from smoking, you're also creating the pain of withdrawal. And our bodies hate that. It's more akin to like hunger or thirst than it is to this sort of nebulous idea of I got to quit because it's bad for my health. Well, your body doesn't, so your brain actually doesn't see it that way. The brain sees it as this hurts and we have to stop it from hurting right now. And the quickest way we can do that is by picking up that cigarette. That's why it's sometimes so difficult to do certain things. But the end result is, in general, until the balance of pain to pleasure or pain to pain is greater for change usually doesn't either stick or it doesn't happen at all. So I hope that wasn't too morbid or horrifying, if at all. There, of course, are ways that you can pound on some pleasure to that change, and that's helpful. But there it is. So sorry if that was horrible news. Yeah, so we'll stop there. Thanks for listening today. Really appreciate you listening to this or watching this video. If you have any questions, if you have a human behavior question, you look at stuff that people do and just sort of go, what did I just see? Why did they do that? Hit me up. I'll see if I can come up with an answer for you. Until next time, have a great day, and thank you for listening. Bye-bye.